On a cold winter night, a woman stands outside the home she once called hers, watching through the window as her husband celebrates with someone else. Laughing, smiling, living the life they were supposed to share. Betrayed, abandoned, and left to rebuild from nothing, she could have disappeared into the shadows of heartbreak. But instead she chooses something different. Step by step, she transforms pain into strength, silence into determination, and loss into the beginning of a powerful comeback. Because sometimes, the moment you are pushed out of someone's life is the exact moment you begin creating a better one. Value and lesson.
That is the funniest
Never
thing I've heard
underestimate
all
the
week. We
power
have to
of
tell
resilience. When life breaks your heart, it may also be giving you the chance to rediscover your strength and rebuild a future that truly belongs to you. If this story inspired you, please support the channel with 1 like and 1 share to help us keep bringing more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The broadcast from the London studio vanished, but the silence that crashed down in its place was absolute. Eleanor's world had just been shattered by the unedited satellite feed she'd witnessed. Her husband's face, unguarded with a tenderness she hadn't received in years, speaking to another woman who was also clearly pregnant. He had been looking at an ultrasound photo on his tablet, a private gesture meant only for her. At 34 weeks pregnant, standing alone in their New York penthouse, she had just watched a live feed of her media magnate husband whispering to his star anchor, and in that single, devastating image, Eleanor understood a soul-crushing truth. Chloe wasn't just his protege. She was carrying his child too. The decisions made in the next few hours were about to orchestrate the spectacular downfall of a $50 billion global media empire before the sun rose over Central Park. But what Marcus Thorne failed to understand was that his wife hadn't been lost in a blissful haze of nursery planning for the past 6 months. She had been investigating. As a former investigative journalist, she was cross-referencing travel logs, tracing dark money transfers, and documenting every encrypted message he used to hide his tracks. The woman he had dismissed as hormonal and overly emotional was about to leak a kill story on his entire life's work. She ended the feed with a single, silent tap. There were no hysterical phone calls, no smashed vases, no warning whatsoever. By morning, Marcus Thorne would lose it all: his company, his credibility, his reputation, and his freedom. This is the story of how a woman's quiet fact-checking became the most damaging exposé in the world. The lesson and value this story shares is a reminder that the most overlooked source often holds the entire story. Sometimes the people everyone assumes are out of the loop are the ones who are about to break the biggest news. Your worth is never a footnote in someone else's narrative. It is the headline you write when they try to edit you out. The meaning of this story is this: every woman who has ever been made to feel like a supporting character in her own life will see herself in Eleanor. Every person who has been lied to, gaslighted, or made to feel crazy for trusting their own gut will feel their instincts validated in these pages. This story is evidence that you are never too broken to be rewritten. You are never too lost to find your own byline again. And your voice, no matter how long it has been silenced, can eventually become the lead story on the front page. The greatest victory isn't in erasing your enemy, it's in publishing your own truth. The reflection in the polished black marble of the fireplace showed a stranger's face the moment Eleanor processed the betrayal. The stillness in the penthouse was total, broken only by the distant wail of a Manhattan siren, a sound that seemed to echo her own internal alarm. 100 floors below, the lights of the city glittered, completely unaware. Eleanor felt a universe away from all of them. Her focus was locked on the giant screen, a feature of the Thorne Global Media Hub, that was supposed to give him access to his assets, but had instead picked up a private feed from the network's London studio, on Marcus, on his expression, on Chloe's body. Their home on the top floor of Thorn Tower was a cold museum of polished steel and panoramic glass, running on $30 million of bespoke security. The priceless abstract paintings, which Eleanor had once loved, now hung on walls that felt like a prison. This was the command center of Thorn Media, the crown jewel of the city's power players. And on its own secure network, her husband was being broadcast, planning a new family with his pregnant mistress. She replayed the clip in her head. 1, 2, 3 seconds. His smile was genuine as he whispered, "Our little one is going to change the world, just like their mother." A sound of pure, unedited admiration. Eleanor recognized that tone. It was the one Marcus used when he was truly captivated, completely engaged. He hadn't spoken about their child with that kind of reverence in months. A soft chime sounded from a nearby control panel, a notification from her calendar. It was a digital ghost, blindly following its programming. It couldn't comprehend her devastation. Nothing could. The city below, the world outside, had already moved on, already forgotten the pregnant woman whose entire reality had just been revealed as a lie. The soft cashmere of Eleanor's maternity gown was stretched taut over her belly. 34 weeks, almost 9 months carrying Marcus Thorne's son. She laid a hand over the curve of her stomach, and the baby replied with a sharp kick, as if sensing the tectonic shift in their world. She picked up her phone, unlocked it, stared at the glowing grid of apps, locked it, unlocked it again. What was the protocol for this? Send him a secure link to the raw footage? A sarcastic tip for the news desk. Thorne is broadcasting his affair. Is this a new unscripted series? She locked the phone. There wasn't a crisis communications plan in the world that could fix this. The memory of Catherine Thorne's voice surfaced in her mind. Marcus's mother ruled New York society like a tyrant, elegant, untouchable, and leaving a wake of social casualties. Her words from the last charity gala coiled around Eleanor like a silk scarf. "Perception is the only stock that matters, my dear," Catherine had said, her voice as smooth as aged whiskey. "Facts can be spun. A good story is invincible." "Did you see it?" Eleanor whispered, a ghost in her own home. "I saw the live feed. He's having another baby with Chloe." The memory of Catherine's perfectly manicured hand on her arm was a phantom pressure. Her smile in her mind's eye was flawless. "Whatever gossip you think you overheard, it lacks context. Thorne women are assets. Thorne women do not start rumors. Thorne women smile, secure the merger, and ensure the family name remains pristine. But I saw it." "You saw a bad camera angle," Catherine's memory corrected. The imagined smile turned to ice. "Now, you are going to be the brilliant, devoted wife of a visionary. You are carrying the future of this dynasty. You will not allow yourself to become a liability." The memory of Catherine faded, leaving Eleanor utterly alone in the sprawling, silent penthouse. She drifted through the cavernous living room, an apparition in her own life. She passed Marcus's framed magazine covers, spotlit on a floating shelf. She passed dynamic portraits of them, smiling in a life that was a meticulously managed public relations campaign. She passed photos with presidents, with royalty, with the titans of industry, all faces from a world that was no longer hers. None of them could see her now. She was Marcus's wife, Marcus's pregnant wife, a beautiful prop in the grand stage production of his magnificent life. She found her phone and placed a secure call to Jessica, her sister, the one person who had never been fooled by Marcus's charismatic public persona. An international correspondent who understood that every official story has an off-the-record version. Her sister's voice was crisp, immediately focused, even in the dead of night. Eleanor, your line is encrypted. What's the story? Jessica went straight to the point, her tone sharpening. What do you have? I need an extraction. What do you have? I just need to get off the grid. Right now, Jess. Jessica didn't ask again. She didn't need the details. She just said, don't move. I'm sending a car. Blackout protocol. It'll be at the service exit in 5 minutes. Be ready. Eleanor turned toward the door. The long, minimalist, white hallway of the penthouse seemed to stretch into an infinite, dark abyss. Each step felt like wading through redacted documents, through the wreckage of the life she thought she was writing. To get to the elevator, she had to pass his home office. He was still in there, his face on the huge screen, still on the same call, his voice alive with enthusiasm. He was laughing, sharing his plans, mapping out a strategy. The feed showed him looking at Chloe with that same unguarded awe. Possessive, an act of claiming her, the way he used to look at Eleanor before she became just another part of his portfolio. Eleanor slipped past the open door. She was close enough to smell the expensive scotch in his glass, close enough to hear him say, Chloe, this new initiative is, you are a true visionary. He didn't look up. He didn't sense his pregnant wife walking past, just a few feet away. He didn't notice her at all. God, I was so stupid, Eleanor thought. The evidence had been everywhere. The frequent business trips to London, the burner phone he kept for sensitive sources, the way his explanations had become increasingly vague, like a heavily redacted report. She had seen 1,000 red flags and had convinced herself they were just the cost of ambition. She reached the door. The private elevator arrived with a soft chime. The cool, neutral air from the lobby below rushed in. It felt like a deep, cleansing breath, clearing a toxic narrative. At the threshold, she looked back. One final glance at the perfect penthouse, the museum-quality art, the custom furnishings, at the closed door of her husband's office, where he was drafting a new life with another woman. Marcus laughed again. His real laugh. The one Eleanor once believed was reserved only for her. The one she now understood was just another tool he deployed to close a deal. The penthouse elevator doors whispered shut. A black luxury sedan was waiting at the curb. The driver, a woman with a calm, professional demeanor, opened the back door. Her eyes were all business, but with a hint of empathy. Eleanor, I'm from Leo. Eleanor hesitated. She could go back upstairs to the life she knew, to the man who treated her like a beautiful piece of art, to the nursery she had spent months designing because Marcus was always on the cusp of a landmark deal. No, not again. Never again. My brother's office, she said, her voice steady. The driver nodded. I have the address. Eleanor slid onto the plush leather seat. She closed the door herself. The car pulled away from the glittering skyscraper with the barest whisper of an electric motor. The lights of the Chicago skyline began to streak past. The noise of his ambition, his charm, his betrayal. It all began to dissolve into static. Eleanor rested both hands on her stomach. The baby was still, as if listening, waiting for what came next. It's all right, little one, she whispered, a hand protectively over her bump. I swear, I am going to fix this. But Eleanor Vance wasn't running to a shelter. She was not going to fall apart. The chapter where she played the supportive, smiling philanthropist's wife had just ended. She was on her way to orchestrate a corporate takedown. The iconic shape of the Willis Tower dominated the night sky. Eleanor stared out as the city lights blurred into rivers of gold. Her phone vibrated. Marcus's face lit up the screen. She ignored the call. A second buzz came immediately after, then a third. She saw the driver's eyes in the rearview mirror, a flicker of polite curiosity, but he said nothing. A good driver knows how to be invisible. The phone went quiet, then lit up with a message. Marcus, my zoning meeting just wrapped. Where are you? The concierge log says you left 20 minutes ago. She looked at the words. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then pulled back. How could she possibly explain? I saw the 7-figure wire transfer. I saw the blueprints for her private penthouse. I saw the look you gave her at the gala. The one that used to be mine. She turned off the screen. Let him worry. The sedan glided by the massive construction site for Thorn Tower, the monument to his ego. The memory felt like a physical blow. Eleanor had stood right beside him at the groundbreaking ceremony. He had called her his cornerstone in front of the reporters. Together, we are building the future of this city, he had proclaimed, his voice filled with conviction. A stronger skyline. That was just 6 months ago, before the endless, late-night negotiations, before the locked financial servers, before Isabella Rossi, the celebrated architect, was hired as a design visionary. Eleanor had researched her, 34, a prodigy, a shark in designer clothing, a meticulously crafted public persona, no real social media, no unscripted appearances. It was as if her private life was secured in a vault back then. Eleanor had seen it as the mark of a true professional, someone focused on their art. Now, she understood the real reason you don't need a personal life online when you're secretly living inside someone else's. When you're the mistress, the file was open on her tablet. Her finger trembled over the icon, a scanned copy of a contract, a hidden ledger, an impossible expense report. Oh God, she's pregnant too, the thought struck Eleanor like lightning. The world tilted, her vision blurred, her own. Baby delivered a sharp, sudden kick, a small jolt against the wave of cold terror that washed over her. Marcus. The driver's voice was gentle. Should I pull over somewhere, Mrs. Vance? No, she said, her voice strained. Just keep going. She made herself take a long, shaky breath in through her nose, out through her mouth, just as the instructor had shown them in the birthing class, the one she went to alone, because Marcus had a sudden emergency with the investors. A new message illuminated the screen. Marcus, are you okay? You should have told me you were feeling unwell. The sheer nerve, the astonishing hypocrisy. He had barely made eye contact with her all evening, hadn't inquired about her latest doctor's visit, hadn't once asked about the nursery. He had done nothing that a concerned husband or an expectant father was supposed to do, and now he was performing concern. She recalled all the nights she had laid awake, listening for his car in the garage, smelling the faint scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his suits, and convincing herself it was just the pressure of his work, that she was being emotional, that pregnancy hormones made you paranoid, and that she ought to be thankful for the incredible life he had provided. The prenuptial agreement, she had discovered it 3 months ago in his study, locked in a biometric safe. He'd claimed it held sensitive deal structures, but Marcus didn't lie. He managed the narrative. She had used the override sequence her brother, a forensic accountant, had given her. For emergencies, a fail-safe. She never dreamed she would use against her own husband. The prenup was an 80-page beast of legal jargon, but one paragraph seemed to glow on the page, Section 9, the Criminal Enterprise Clause, in the event of a felony conviction of either party that results in material damage to the family's public reputation. The non-implicated party shall be granted an 80% controlling stake in Thorn Global Holdings, nullifying all other claims. When they signed, Marcus had dismissed the clause as a formality. Demanded by his lenders, he swore it was just boilerplate language that would never be relevant because his integrity was everything. And she had taken him. At his word, she had signed it without a second thought. She had trusted the man who spoke of building a legacy while slipping a 6-carat cushion-cut diamond onto her finger. I was so naive, so desperate for the security I never had as a child, that I willingly ignored every single warning sign. Eleanor opened a secure application on her tablet. The icon was a simple rendering of a bridge. Inside was the portfolio she had been painstakingly assembling for 2 months. The leaked internal emails from his server, the falsified invoices from shell corporations, and the structural analysis reports for the new tower that he had ordered buried. She had not been losing her mind. She had been building a case after discovering the prenup. She'd contacted her father, Harrison, a retired appellate court judge, the same man who had reviewed the original incorporation documents for Thorne Global as a favor years before she and Marcus were even engaged. She had posed hypothetical questions to him about corporate malfeasance, about derivative lawsuits, about what might theoretically happen if a wife found out. Her real estate mogul husband was a white-collar criminal. Harrison's hypothetical answers had been terrifyingly precise. Another text from Marcus. Marcus, I am actually getting worried now. Eleanor, please answer my calls. She composed a reply, and this time she pressed send. Eleanor, I'm fine. I just needed some space. It was true in a way, but it was a universe away from the whole truth. It was a strategic delay. His answer was instantaneous. Marcus, come back home. We have the Architectural Guild fundraiser in the morning. The fundraiser? The ultimate public relations event, Chicago's premier power couple, presenting a check for $1 million for an architectural scholarship fund. All while one of them was actively committing massive fraud against the city, because that was the other secret. Eleanor had unearthed the crime that made his infidelity seem almost insignificant. Project Ascension wasn't just his signature skyscraper. It was a conspiracy to use counterfeit structural steel and falsified safety certifications, materials paid for by investors who thought they were funding the pinnacle of modern engineering. Her brother had helped her trace the payments through offshore accounts. A contact from her former career at the Chicago History Museum helped confirm the suppliers were fronts for organized crime. Her father had helped her arrange the evidence into an indestructible legal case they had been protecting, her arming her, building a legal fortress around her in ways she was only now starting to comprehend. Eleanor, I'm heading to my father's on Lake Michigan. I'm not feeling well. She powered off the phone, cutting the final digital connection to the life she thought she had. The car moved through the silent, sleeping suburbs, a 24-hour diner, a playground with motionless swings, a town square with a small veterans memorial, ordinary places for ordinary people who had no idea that Eleanor Vance's perfectly constructed world had not just been destroyed, perhaps it had been reforged, because the evidence she possessed wasn't just for a divorce attorney. It was for the attorney general enough to completely ruin him, seize his company, obliterate his reputation, and take away his freedom for years. The data on her tablet would not just end a marriage, it would topple an empire. Eleanor rested her head against the cool glass. The baby inside her was finally still. Her own trembling started to subside. The tears refused to come. She was finished wasting tears on him. She had spent too much of her life as an object he considered an elegant accessory, a vessel to produce an heir, a useful partner for his public persona. Never again. Just 45 more minutes to the lake house. 45 more minutes to review the strategy for the absolute demolition of Marcus Thorne. Eleanor closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to focus. The porch light was on a warm beacon against the dark Michigan woods. Harrison always left it on when he expected her. The wood and stone house was the antithesis of their cold glass penthouse on the river. All warm woods and overflowing bookshelves, the same tire swing her grandfather had hung from the giant oak tree 50 years ago. Hanging still in the damp night air, this was real. A real home, not a sterile gallery, filled with expensive art and unspoken rules. Alex guided the car down the winding driveway. The soft crunch of gravel broke the silence as he killed the engine. "Shall I wait, Mrs. Croft?" he asked, his voice quiet. "No, thank you, Alex. I'll call when I need a car back to the city if I ever go back," she thought that last part to herself. The front door swung open before she took the first step. Edward stood there, 70 years old, his silver hair neatly combed a thick wool cardigan over his shirt. His glasses were perched on his forehead. "You're here?" Edward said it wasn't a question or a greeting, just a simple confirmation of fact. Nina walked up the stone path. Her ankles were swollen and a deep ache settled in her lower back. The baby suddenly felt immense, a heavy weight ready to be born into a world that had just been torn apart. She reached her father, and the steel composure she had maintained for the past few hours finally shattered the sobs she'd swallowed in the penthouse and the car, the tears she'd refused to shed for weeks. Edward wrapped her in his arms, saying nothing, just holding her tightly as she cried into his shoulder. The wind whipped off Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of the old Lincoln Park brownstone. An L train rumbled past in the distance, a familiar city lullaby. The air was cold, a shock to the system. "Come on, Izzy," Evelyn said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's get some coffee going. You look frozen." The kitchen was the heart of the house, a modern space tucked inside a historic shell. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under recessed lighting, and the air smelled of fresh espresso and old paper from the countless books lining the walls. Evelyn, a woman who moved with the quiet precision of a chess master, ground the beans, filled the machine, and pulled 2 heavy ceramic mugs from a cabinet she'd built herself. Izzy collapsed onto a stool at the massive granite island, the same spot where she'd meticulously planned her university applications, confessed she was dropping pre-med for architecture, and announced her whirlwind engagement to Julian Croft. Her mother had been quietly skeptical. Evelyn had posed calm, logical questions that Isabella, dizzy with love, had brushed aside. "What's his 5-year plan, Izzy? What are his ethics when the pressure is on?" Izzy's own intuition had been a low hum of unease, but she'd ignored it, utterly captivated by the charismatic founder of Nexus AI, the man who promised to build the future with her. "I should have listened," she murmured to her mother, to the quiet warnings in her own mind that something about his perfect world was built on a faulty foundation. The espresso machine hissed, then gurgled, its rich aroma filling the room. Evelyn poured the dark liquid into the mugs, and they sat in the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The digital clock on the oven glowed, marking time with silent precision. The steam from the coffee warmed Izzy's face as her mother pushed a mug toward her. She gripped it, the heat a small comfort. "Mom," her voice cracked, "I need to tell you something." "I know, sweetheart." Isabella looked up, her stomach twisting. "You know?" Evelyn walked over to her study, retrieved a tablet, and placed it on the island. The screen glowed, displaying a complex file directory. "I spent 30 years as a forensic accountant, untangling the finances of corporate criminals. I know a doctored ledger when I see one, sweetheart. Your husband's company isn't just innovative, it's a house of cards." Isabella just stared at the screen, at folders labeled with cryptic acronyms. "You knew, the whole time." "I suspected. Then I started digging. And then I knew," Evelyn said, tapping a file. "Nexus AI's entire core algorithm, the one that secured their last round of funding. It was stolen, bit for bit, from a rival company. Along with their Q4 and Q1 performance projections, that huge government contract he just landed, the demo he used was built on stolen data. It will never function as promised." The lines of code and internal memos on the screen swam before Isabella's eyes. She had noticed Julian's paranoia about security, his vague answers about his lead programmers, but seeing her mother's methodical breakdown of the fraud made it real and terrifying. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," Evelyn said, her tone softening with empathy. "You had to find the door yourself. I could only show you what was on the other side. Or you'd be defending him, telling me I'm overreacting, blaming my architect's cynicism or my pregnancy hormones." Isabella didn't argue. She knew it was true. She had defended Julian's obsessive work habits, his sudden server migration trips to Seattle, his brutal tactics and poaching talent. "There's more," Evelyn said. She swiped to a different folder, expense reports, encrypted chat logs, photos from a company retreat, a woman with dark hair laughing with Julian. Anya Petrova isn't just the lead data scientist at his biggest competitor, is he? Isabella's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" She's been feeding him proprietary code for 18 months. He's been paying her through a shell corporation set up as a consulting firm. And based on his calendar and her encrypted emails to a friend, she's about 4 months pregnant. Evelyn let the information settle, each fact a carefully placed weight. Pregnant. His weekend trips to de-stress in the Bay Area were strategy sessions with her. The world felt like it was tilting. The sleek smartphone slipped from Isabella's hand, its screen spiderwebbing as it hit the slate tile floor. She barely noticed. Another baby. Julian was having another baby. A whole secret alliance, a life of corporate and personal betrayal running in parallel to the one he was designing with her. "No!" The word was a strangled whisper. "He wouldn't. We have the server logs." Evelyn's voice was clinical, the tone she used when testifying in court. "He routed the payments through an untraceable crypto wallet, but he got sloppy. I traced it back to a seed fund he controls. The data transfers, the affair, it's all there in the metadata. Anya Petrova is expecting his child." A wave of cold washed over Isabella. She protectively cradled her own stomach, the baby she thought was the start of their legacy, Julian's first child. She was carrying his second child by a woman he was actively betraying her with. How many other firewalls had Julian Croft bypassed in his life? "Her name is Anya," Evelyn said, her voice gentle again. "She's due in May. Last month, when Julian told you he was at a tech symposium in Tokyo, he was with her in a rented house in Big Sur, mapping out how to integrate the final piece of stolen code before the IPO. The live stream he sent her, it must have been a pre-recorded loop. She had watched it, proud and beaming. She had believed every single word. The most sickening part was that a small, logical part of her brain, the part that designed blueprints, had always known the foundation was unstable. "What do I do?" Isabella asked, her voice lost in the high-ceilinged kitchen. "That, my love, is entirely up to you." Evelyn closed the tablet. "You can go back to that glass penthouse. Pretend you never saw any of this. Have your baby, be the perfect tech mogul's wife, and wait for the inevitable crash. Or—" Evelyn's eyes were sharp. "Or you can fight. You can use everything in these files to expose him. Scuttle his IPO, destroy his reputation, and make sure he pays for every line of code he stole and every lie he told." Isabella looked at her mother, the woman who had raised her alone, who had faced down corporate titans with nothing but a calculator, and the truth, who had taught her that the most important part of any structure is its integrity, and to never, ever trust a man who encrypts his entire life from his partner. "There's something else," Isabella said, a cold certainty solidifying in her voice. "Something he had me review. The Series C funding agreement, the key person provision. You found it?" A flicker of pride crossed Evelyn's face. "The VCs put it in. Should the CEO be found guilty of gross misconduct, corporate espionage, or any act that brings the company into significant public disrepute, the board has the right to immediately terminate his position and claw back all vested shares. Julian thought it was just standard boilerplate. He has no idea they can take everything. No, his father was a showman, not a strategist. He never taught Julian the difference between confidence and hubris. Evelyn shook her head. He seriously underestimated his son's capacity for self-destruction. Isabella's baby wasn't Julian's only child on the way. That wasn't even the foundation of his deceit, and by the time the markets opened on Monday, Julian Croft wouldn't just be losing a wife, he would be losing his entire company. The smart display on the counter glowed 3 a.m. Isabella hadn't slept. Her body ached with fatigue, but her mind was clearer than it had been in years. The kitchen island had become their command center, littered with devices and printed documents. Evelyn had spent hours methodically building a timeline, linking payments to data transfers and travel records. She worked with a quiet, focused fury. I've been tracking Nexus AI's stock options for a nonprofit ethics group, Evelyn admitted, her voice low. For 6 months, Izzy, I was going to tell you. I was just trying to build a case that couldn't be dismissed. Everyone was trying to protect me, Isabella said, her voice devoid of emotion. Everyone except the man I married. Eleanor presented her final findings, manipulated trade logs, ghost servers, routed through the Caymans to mask latency, and encrypted messages outlining the whole operation. The fraud is infinitely worse than the affair, B, Eleanor said. Vance Capital has been a criminal enterprise from the start. Ever since Arthur pushed out his founding partner, he's used the firm to deploy a predictive algorithm, front-running the market on a global scale. He's inflated the fund's value by at least £500 million. The bulk of that was being funneled into his and Chloe's offshore accounts, ready for after the IPO. Beatrice stared at the complex web of deceit. Secret server farms and data havens from Malta to Monaco. How did the regulators, or the auditors, never catch on? She asked. They did, Beatrice replied, pulling up a new file. These were quantitative analysts and compliance officers who flagged impossible trades. Every single one was either promoted into a silent partnership with a brutal non-disclosure agreement or professionally ruined within a fiscal quarter. 2 tried to go to the Financial Conduct Authority. Their careers were erased. Erased? The Vance family has deep connections in the city. Arthur's father basically wrote the book on financial lobbying. Eleanor's voice was grim. When you control that much capital, you can delete any reality that doesn't suit you. I deserved more than a beautifully managed lie. I deserved the truth. The thought settled in Eleanor's mind, a single point of clarity in the chaos of her life. Beatrice came back from the other room, holding a different tablet. I found the legal strategy documents. What documents? Eleanor asked, her voice feeling distant. The ones Arthur's solicitors uploaded to a hidden partition on his private server last week. Beatrice's face was like granite. He was going to serve you divorce papers the day after your baby shower. He was planning to petition for sole custody, citing prenatal emotional distress as the reason. The room went absolutely still, filled with a low electronic hum. Even Beatrice, who had just been tracing lines of international financial crime, looked completely stunned. He was going to take my baby away from me, Eleanor whispered, the words getting stuck in her throat. He was going to attempt it, Beatrice said, setting the tablet on the mahogany desk. His legal team has been building a file. Your anxiety attack before the Davos summit, the time you broke down from exhaustion at the charity gala, the prescription for anti-anxiety medication you filled 3 months ago. Eleanor remembered that prescription. She'd been having suffocating panic attacks, waking up at 3 a.m., certain the markets were crashing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Arthur had been the one to insist she speak to a professional, recommending a performance psychiatrist who was a legend among London's elite financiers, a psychiatrist who, it was now horrifyingly obvious, was feeding every confidential session note directly to Arthur's lawyers. It was a hostile takeover, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Our entire relationship. He never wanted an equal. He wanted a legacy carrier from a good family, a wife who looked perfect at fundraisers and was too removed from his real work to ever question the numbers, and someone without the resources to fight him in court, Beatrice added grimly. Your family has a good name, but you don't have Vance-level wealth. He assumed you'd accept a settlement and vanish quietly. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. Eleanor gestured to her own screen, where a sophisticated analysis program displayed a perfectly structured timeline. I have satellite data from his own jet placing him in Zurich when he claimed to be at a conference in Dubai. I have transcribed audio of him instructing his lawyers to subpoena my medical history. I have blockchain records for a penthouse purchased in Chloe's name that certainly wasn't for us. The program connected it all. She looked at her sister and her mother, the two women anchoring her as her world came apart. Between the three of us, we have more than enough ammunition to burn his entire dynasty to the ground. The only outstanding question is how much of the earth we want to salt when we're done. The digital display on the mantelpiece glowed 3:30 in the morning. The holographic flames in the fireplace cast a warm, flickering light across the study. Outside, the London rain was beginning to ease, leaving the city skyline reflected in the wet streets below. Eleanor's phone, which she'd powered on an hour earlier, buzzed relentlessly on the marble-topped island. 16 missed calls from Arthur, 12 voicemails, 27 messages, their tone shifting from condescending worry to raw, unbridled fury, and finally, to poorly disguised threats. Play them, Beatrice urged. Let's establish his psychological baseline. Eleanor placed the phone on the counter and tapped the speaker. The first message started. Eleanor, where are you? Your mother said you left the fundraiser early. Call me. He sounded irritated, but was trying to mask it with a calm, commanding tone. The second message. I do not appreciate being made to look like a fool, Eleanor. That event was critical for the new charity initiative. Your abrupt exit was noticed. The facade was cracking. The fifth message. This is becoming irrational. You are letting your hormones dictate your actions. Whatever story you have invented is based on flawed assumptions. It was his signature move, patronizing dismissal, the tone he always used when she challenged him on a point of fact. The eighth message, if you are going to refuse to engage in a logical conversation, I can only assume you're having another anxiety-related incident. You know what Dr. Alistair said about managing your stress levels. The gaslighting was now in full effect, building his case that she was unstable. The 12th and final message. That is it. I am logging this with Dr. Alistair. It is clear the pregnancy is affecting your reasoning. You need to come home immediately. It was pure, deliberate manipulation, turning her own health care into a weapon to be used against her. Beatrice was already recording the audio on her own device. He's building his narrative. If this ever went before a judge, he'd paint her as unhinged from the very beginning. It will never get to a courtroom. Beatrice's voice was like ice. We will make sure he has nothing left but his name. Eleanor stared at the phone, at the photo of the man she thought she had married, the father of her unborn child, the stranger who had been running a completely different program behind the firewall of their life for 4 years. "Get Alistair on the phone," she commanded. "Tell him the contingency is active." The call was brief. Alistair Finch, their family's solicitor, answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and ready even at this hour, as if he had been waiting. "I had a feeling my phone might ring tonight," he said. "Your prenuptial agreement contains an exceptionally strong criminality clause. With the evidence you've gathered, you are entitled to 60% of all marital assets." "And the provision in the family charter?" Eleanor asked. "The Vance legacy clause? Is it fully enforceable?" Alistair had insisted on its inclusion when Arthur's grandfather established the charter. "Any action that brings catastrophic public disgrace to the family name or involves financial felonies nullifies the primary heir's inheritance, all of it. The controlling shares in the firm, the entire algorithm, patent library, the server infrastructure. Everything reverts to the charter's secondary beneficiary. Does Arthur know about this? He has no clue. His grandfather kept that clause under lock and key, assuming the theoretical danger would be enough to keep his descendants in line without ever needing to invoke it." Eleanor looked at the encrypted files on her laptop, the proof of market manipulation, the evidence of a secret life, the digital trail of a man whose kingdom was built on sand. "One more thing, Alistair. What happens to the Vance Foundation if we expose his financial crimes? The primary assets will be frozen in a federal investigation, and any untainted funds would be reorganized under a new board," Alistair explained. "Or they could be redirected into a new philanthropic trust with a new director, someone who could channel that wealth toward promoting financial ethics and transparency. Someone like you, if you were so inclined. You would have the legal standing as the wronged party, and your background in investigative journalism gives you immediate authority." Eleanor had been one of the most respected financial journalists in the country before she met Arthur. He had called it her retirement, persuading her she shouldn't have to deal with that kind of pressure, that he would take care of everything. It was just another form of control she had mistaken for love. "Execute the protocol," she said. "Everything. The divorce filing, the encrypted data package to the Financial Times, and the formal notice to the Charter's Board of Governors. I want it all to hit the wire before the London Stock Exchange opens." "Understood." She ended the call. The study was silent apart from the hum of the computers and the distant sound of the city waking up. By sunrise, Eleanor wouldn't just be leaving her husband. She would be triggering a controlled demolition of his entire world. The sky over the Thames shifted from inky black to a bruised, heavy gray. A new day was breaking. The worst night of Eleanor's life was almost over. Her phone buzzed one more time, Arthur's name illuminating the screen. She had been mentally preparing for this conversation for hours, dreading it. "Answer him," Beatrice said. "Let's hear his opening gambit." Eleanor took a steadying breath and swiped to answer. "Where in God's name have you been?" Arthur's voice was sharp, brutal. The voice he used on traders who lost a decimal point. The voice he was now, finally, using on her. "I'm all right, Leo," Eleanor said. "That isn't what I asked. My mother is beside herself with worry. You vanished from the museum benefit without a word. People are starting to gossip. Let them." A tense quiet hung in the air between them. She could almost feel his mind recalibrating, shifting strategies, searching for a new line of attack. "Eleanor." His voice deepened, adopting a quiet, threatening edge. "Come home. Right now." "No. I'm sorry?" The word felt foreign, hanging in the space between his glass-walled penthouse, overlooking the lake, and her parents' house. Eleanor had never said no to Leo. Not a firm no. She had debated. She had presented counter-arguments. She had offered different perspectives. But she had never once just denied him. "I said no, Leo. For the very first time in our marriage, I am telling you no. And I am never setting foot in that apartment again. She heard a sharp crack on his end, the distinct sound of something expensive being thrown against a wall. Leo had a temper. He masked it well in public, but behind the scenes, their designer furniture often bore the brunt of it. You think you can just walk away from me? He let out a harsh, grating laugh. You have no leverage, Eleanor. The prenuptial agreement you signed leaves you with absolutely nothing. You'll be pregnant with no connections and desperate for a lifeline. I read the entire contract, Leo. Every single page. That includes the fidelity clause you dismissed as standard boilerplate because you swore you would never be unfaithful. Silence. I also read the reputation clause in your family's founding charter, the one your grandfather insisted on, the one you don't even know exists. The silence on the phone stretched, becoming almost crushingly heavy. She could practically hear the gears in his brain seizing up as he struggled with this new information, trying to calculate the damage. Oh, and by the way, Eleanor added, her tone deceptively casual, how is your other son doing? He would be, what, almost 3 years old by now? Little Leo. The one who lives in that lovely graystone in Lincoln Park you visit on weekends when you claim to be at a real estate development summit in Dubai. The line went dead. Eleanor stared down at her phone, her hands shaking, her heart hammering against her ribs. But a slow, resolute smile touched her lips. She had just fired the opening shot. Arthur had until dawn to surrender. He wouldn't. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of secure communications. Eleanor's lawyer transmitted the encrypted document sets. Her sister, Isabel, coordinated with the forensic accountant to greenlight the release of his report. Eleanor approved every single action, sanctioning each directive with a tap on her tablet. At 6 a.m., she officially filed the divorce petition. The documents landed at precisely the same instant in the inboxes of Leo's senior counsel, the board members of his development firm, and the Illinois Attorney General's office. At 6:30, her phone vibrated again. It wasn't Leo. This time it was his father. Richard Sterling's voice was as cold as Lake Michigan in winter. What in God's name do you think you're doing? Good morning, Richard. I assume Leo has filled you in on our last discussion. You are making a monumental mistake. You have no comprehension of what you're up against. On the contrary, I know exactly what I am up against. A real estate empire founded on illegal zoning variances. A husband who created a new family while I was going through my 3rd round of fertility treatments. A patriarch who prioritizes his public image over common decency. This is going to end horribly for you. I will make sure of it. You'll make sure of what? Sue me for defamation? Challenge my custody rights? Try to have me declared mentally incompetent? Eleanor's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I have a dead man's switch connected to every crime your family has ever covered up. For the last 2 years, I have compiled encrypted drives, audio recordings from his home office, and sworn statements from contractors he has ruined. If anything at all happens to me or my child, it all becomes public. Every major journalist in the city, every news station, and every federal prosecutor in the state will receive a copy. Silence. Your son is not just about to lose his wife, Richard. He's on the verge of losing his company, his inheritance, and his liberty. The only choice you have left is to decide if you want to go down with him. She disconnected the call before he could manage a response. Isabel looked at her, her expression a mixture of pure shock and admiration. I have never heard you talk like that in my entire life. I've never had a reason to before, Eleanor said, sinking onto the sofa. The rush of adrenaline had vanished, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been awake for over 24 hours. Or maybe I always have been. Maybe I've been this angry for years and just became an expert at suppressing it. Isabel handed her a cup of tea, placing it carefully on a coaster and resting a supportive hand on her shoulder. That anger is your strength, Isabel said gently. It shows you're finally done letting him diminish you. But even as she spoke, Eleanor felt the rage begin to recede, revealing the raw pain beneath. The anger was a shield. Underneath it was a vast ocean of sorrow for the life she believed she was building with him. She had truly loved Leo, and that was the betrayal that hurt the most. Despite the obvious red flags she had chosen to ignore, the late nights he claimed were spent finalizing deals, and the nagging intuition she had brushed off as pregnancy-related anxiety. She had been in love with the image of the man he was, the brilliant developer he portrayed so perfectly. But that man was a fabrication. She was grieving a ghost. At 7 in the morning, a black Navigator was parked at the curb of Isabel's street. Eleanor watched from behind the blinds as 3 people in severe, dark suits emerged. They were the type of corporate fixers Leo employed to make problems disappear. They strode toward the front door, oozing confidence, prepared to handle the hysterical wife and reclaim a rogue asset. They were completely unprepared for what awaited them on the other side. Eleanor opened it herself. 8 months pregnant, dressed in a worn Northwestern sweatshirt and yoga pants, her hair in a messy bun, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. She had never felt more powerful. Mrs. Sterling, the leader of the group, a woman who projected an air of cold authority. Your husband has requested that you come back to the penthouse. He is willing to forgive this unfortunate display of emotion. Forgive. A dry, humorless laugh escaped Eleanor's throat. I don't need his forgiveness. He also wishes to inform you that if you continue down this irrational course, he will have no choice but to sue for sole custody, citing your current fragile state. The hormonal imbalance of the pregnancy, this rash departure, leaving a major charity gala without any explanation. He has colleagues ready to testify to your current mental instability. Then he ought to know that I have a forensic accountant who specializes in real estate fraud. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Tribune and the most aggressive litigation attorney in Chicago on my team. He should also know that the first domino has already been pushed. The lawyer blinked, a brief flicker of doubt clouding her features. What domino? All of them, Eleanor stated, a small, cold smile forming on her lips. The divorce petition, which includes proof of his affair. The whistleblower complaint I submitted to the Attorney General, detailing his illegal campaign contributions. And an exhaustive letter to his father, invoking the character and integrity clause in the Sterling Family Trust's charter. The 3 lawyers exchanged a look, a silent current of alarm flashing between them. Mr. Sterling would like to begin a discussion regarding a settlement, the lead attorney said, her tone now filled with caution. There is nothing to settle. The consequences are already in motion. She shut the door on their dumbfounded faces. Through the window, she saw them scurry back to their car, making panicked calls. The Navigator remained parked. They were waiting for new instructions. Leo had until sunrise to capitulate. The sun was now reflecting off the high rises in the loop. The negotiation was just getting started. They came to the door 3 more times, each offer arriving as a text, each one substantially larger than the last. 10 million, then 25, and finally $50 million to make this entire ordeal vanish. Eleanor rejected every single one. You could just accept the money, Isabel said. They were in the spare room, now a makeshift war room littered with laptops and legal papers. $50 million means you could go anywhere, start a wonderful new life. This was never about the money, Eleanor answered, watching the lawyers pace on the sidewalk, their professional calm starting to crumble. It's about accountability. Accountability is expensive, Isabel pointed out, and draining, and more often than not, it doesn't work. Then I will spend every penny I have to prove you wrong. The morning news was playing on a television in the corner, and Isabel increased the volume. A business reporter was covering a sudden turn of events in the real estate market. We have breaking news that all construction on Sterling Holdings projects has been immediately halted this morning, pending a significant announcement. Sources are pointing to rumors of a possible investigation by the Attorney General, though both the company and the AG's office have refused to comment at this time. It was happening. The first crack in the foundation of his empire. Mr. Davies, the chief financial officer for Sterling Holdings, called at 9:30. He was a man Eleanor had chatted with at dozens of fundraisers, perpetually nervous, always appearing as though he was bracing for disaster. Eleanor. His voice was a strained, desperate whisper. I have to talk to you. Where did you get my private cell number? I've had that for almost 2 years now. Since the charity ball at the De Young. He paused. I tried to give you a hint that night. About the second set of books, about what Julian was doing with those Cayman Island accounts. You didn't understand what I was implying. She did recall that night, remembered Mr. Peterson lingering at the edge of their circle, looking like he wanted to speak up before he was swallowed by the crowd. She had figured he was just out of his element among all the tech billionaires. I understand with perfect clarity now, she said. I have the real ledgers. Every fraudulent zoning application he pushed through, every bribe he paid to a city official. I've held onto a secure, personal copy for the last 6 years. His voice was a blend of sheer panic and resolve. I kept telling myself I needed to stay, to try and do right by the families who bought into those condos, to protect the junior architects who didn't know their boss was a monster. But things just kept getting more corrupt. So why come to me with this now? Because you're the only person who has enough power to actually get him to face the consequences. Michael took a shaky breath. And because you were always decent to me at those holiday parties, when almost everyone else just looked right past me. You asked me about my son. You remembered his name was Leo. Amelia had forgotten those tiny gestures of kindness, the sliver of her old self she had struggled to keep alive while performing the role of Mrs. Julian Thorne. I'll give a deposition, Peterson said, a new firmness in his voice. Anything your lawyer requires, I will provide. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you. This is long past due. She disconnected the call. Isabel, her attorney, was already making notes on a legal pad. The chief financial officer becoming a cooperating witness is the smoking gun, Isabel said, her voice electric with possibility. That is undeniable proof. It provides access to financial records that would have taken us a decade to get through subpoenas. He's also a decent man who is risking his entire career to do the right thing. Amelia felt a sudden, fierce connection to him. He was trying to fix the corporation from within for years. Just like I was trying to fix our marriage for years. We were both trying to salvage a gorgeous skyscraper that was built on a crumbling foundation. The sharp sound from the intercom cut through the silence, making Amelia startle. Probably more messengers, more legal notices, more offers to buy her silence. But the man on the video feed was no paralegal. It was Harrison Thorne. Julian's father stood on the damp San Francisco pavement below, a perfect picture of Pacific Heights influence in a bespoke wool coat, carrying a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. Her brother Liam stepped in front of her. I seriously doubt it's a good idea for you to see him. I am not visiting to make things worse. Harrison's voice, small through the speaker, was different, weaker, more fragile than Amelia had ever heard it. "I am visiting because I have to help." Amelia moved past her brother. "Why on earth would you want to help me?" For a brief moment, Harrison's powerful facade cracked. It was just enough time for Amelia to glimpse the profound exhaustion beneath it. "Because my grandson should inherit a legacy that isn't rotted through with corruption. Because I have dedicated my life to building a respectable firm, not a criminal syndicate, and I am finished watching my son demolish it. Because I know where the undeniable proof is hidden, and it's time for someone with integrity to drag it into the daylight." He held up a simple, antique-looking brass key, the only key to the off-site physical archive. Decades of backroom deals, illegal campaign contributions, bid rigging, everything Julian has been hiding since he took over the development division. Harrison's hand was shaking, just slightly. "I made him a partner when he was 27 years old. I have been a silent party to his ruthless ambition ever since. Maybe this is my one opportunity to make up for that." Amelia gazed at the key on the monitor. "Why do this now? Why not 6 years ago? Because 6 years ago, I was still captivated by his wins, by the soaring property values, by my own foolish pride." Harrison's eyes were bright with tears he refused to let fall. "But my grandson is coming, and I will not let him be raised in the same poisonous environment that twisted my own son." It was the most honest thing Amelia had ever seen from him. "I can't forgive you," Amelia said, her voice flat. "For all the years you ignored it, for every single time you suggested my role was to be a gracious hostess. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking for a chance to salvage what's left." Harrison raised his head. "Anything you need, whatever it takes to burn that entire division to ash, I will supply it. Even if it means losing the company I built from nothing." The intercom was silent. The street below was quiet, apart from the low rumble of a distant cable car. Amelia looked at the image of the brass key, at her father-in-law's broken pride on the monitor, at the life she was about to completely dismantle. No negotiations, no settlements, no backing down. "Come on up," she said. "We have a great deal to go over." They spoke for more than 2 hours, and then Harrison left. Her lawyer, Isabel, departed shortly after, and even Liam went to his home office to take calls from his own anxious circle of friends. Amelia was finally by herself. She went into the guest room, the walls painted a soothing sea-foam green from when her brother had first bought the condo. An old armchair was piled high with books on urban planning and structural engineering. The window offered a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, the same view she had admired more than a decade ago, fantasizing about the architectural career she would create for herself. She had achieved it, in a sense. A massive penthouse overlooking the bay, a diamond the size of a quail's egg, a marriage to a celebrated real estate visionary, a life built on a foundation of concrete and deception. The adrenaline was wearing off. The fury had cooled to embers. All that was left was a deep, empty ache. Amelia sat on the side of the guest bed. She wept for the hotel receipts from a boutique hotel in Napa she'd found in a hidden folder on their home server while he was at a supposed leadership summit in Singapore. For the nursery blueprints he had never bothered to look at. For the beautiful, sunlit room she had designed and overseen herself while he was with Chloe. She wept for the woman she had been before him, an ambitious architect, fiercely passionate about her sustainable designs, content in her quirky, blueprint-filled apartment in the Mission District. That woman had been methodically erased, taken apart, and reassembled to conform to Julian Thorne's world, his relentless schedule, his impossible expectations. At some point, she had stopped being the architect and had become just another decorative feature in his portfolio. The baby kicked, a soft but firm reminder against the storm raging inside Amelia's body. She took a ragged breath, willing her heart to slow down concentrating on the tiny life that was counting on her to be strong enough to see this through. Her brother Liam showed up in the doorway. He didn't speak, just came over and sat next to her, wrapping her in a solid embrace as her crying began to quiet down. "I threw away 4 years, Liam." "You didn't throw them away," he said quietly, smoothing her hair. "You endured them. That isn't the same thing. I should have seen it. I should have left him after the first time he lied. Perhaps. Or perhaps you needed to arrive at this very spot, this exact point in time, when you at last discovered the strength to bring his entire corrupt world crashing down." Liam's voice was low and steady. The Amelia who married him would not have been able to do this. You had to become someone different first. Amelia thought about it. She thought of the young woman who was so impressed by his vision, who believed every excuse because the future he was building seemed so magnificent. That woman was an idealist. That woman was desperate for a love as grand and daring as the building she designed. This woman was a pragmatist. "I'm terrified," Amelia whispered, "of what comes next, of raising this child on my own, of being the woman who ruined San Francisco's visionary developer." "Good. Being scared means you know what's on the line." Liam pulled back to meet her eyes. "But you are not on your own. You have me. You have Isabel. You have our family. And now, heaven help us, you even have Harrison. What if I fail? What if you succeed?" Amelia didn't have a response to that. She had not allowed herself to imagine winning, to imagine a life that wasn't defined by this conflict. "Go take a very long hot shower," Liam said kindly. "Change into something that makes you feel like your old self. I'll get some food delivered. Then we plan our opening move." He was gone, and Amelia remained in the silence for one more minute. She was collecting her resolve, fortifying her soul for the fight that was coming. The shower was hot enough to sting, the steam a purifying cloud. She remained under the water until her skin was pink, until the last tear had been washed away, until she felt as though she had been scoured clean all the way to her bones. She put on clothes from a box Liam had saved from her old apartment, a worn-out t-shirt from a local architectural firm that barely fit over her belly, and a pair of comfortable faded jeans. She studied her reflection. She didn't fully recognize the woman with the determined glint in her eyes, looking back. But maybe that was for the best. She had spent 4 years playing the part of Mrs. Thorne. It was time to remember how to be Amelia. By 3 p.m., the story had gone viral. An inside source had dropped a bombshell data file to the city's leading financial journal. The SEC promptly declared a comprehensive investigation into Vance Capital. The firm's stock, once the golden child of Wall Street, nosedived 15% in less than 60 minutes. Board members were scrambling, either releasing panic denials or tendering their resignations immediately. Their legal teams were uniformly offering no comment. Clara witnessed the implosion from her lawyer's high-rise office. Her attorney, Genevieve, was beside her, her phone buzzing incessantly. "That wasn't my doing," Genevieve admitted, looking utterly stunned. "My strategy was to file for an asset freeze in the morning, giving Arthur just enough leeway to incriminate himself with a fabricated public statement." "So who leaked it?" A message from one of Genevieve's contacts gave them the answer: his own father. He had opted to protect the future of his grandchild over shielding his son in the here and now. Clara could only gaze at the screen. Her father-in-law, a man whose life creed was the Vance legacy above all. The man who had been a power broker in New York for 4 decades. When the chips were down, he had chosen his bloodline over his brand name. The news broadcast shifted to a live view of the gleaming Vance Capitol Tower. A swarm of journalists had laid siege to the entrance. Staff were seen pouring out. their expressions a mix of disbelief and fury. The dynasty was crumbling in real time. Arthur's face appeared on screen, a stock photo from an investor conference, looking self-assured and unbeatable, the wunderkind of New York finance. The news anchor's voiceover chronicled his astonishingly rapid demise. Insiders at the SEC are suggesting Arthur Vance could be facing federal indictments for securities fraud and embezzlement. His wife initiated divorce proceedings this morning, citing irreconcilable differences. His wife. The designation was still hers for a few moments more. Her phone began to vibrate. Arthur. This time she answered, Clara. His voice was hollow, stripped of its typical arrogant certainty and filled with raw, desperate fear. Please, you need to let me give my side of the story. You can't just do this. The firm, my father, you don't understand the kind of pressure I was facing. I understand the decision you made, she replied, her voice as calm and cold as the Hudson River at sunrise. You made a decision every single day, and every single day you decided to lie to me. I love you. The sentiment was so hollow, it bordered on absurd. It was a fabrication. It had been a fabrication from the start. No, Arthur, you love the concept of me, the art curator wife, the ideal accessory for your public persona, the stabilizing force you needed to secure your latest round of capital. Her voice remained steady. You were never in love with who I am. You have no clue who I am. I can make this right. We can go to counseling. We can begin again. It's much too late for any of that. It was too late the moment I found the second cell phone, the one filled with all of your messages to her. A vast, weighty silence stretched between them, punctuated only by a noise she never thought she would hear from Arthur Vance. A broken, hopeless sob. Please, Clara, I am about to lose everything. You already lost me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. That took place months ago. You were just too consumed with your financial empire to even notice. She ended the call. The media went into a frenzy, a torrent of fresh accusations and expert analysis on the spectacular implosion of a hedge fund dynasty. At 5 p.m., the board of Vance Capital called an emergency meeting. At 6:30, they sent out a press release announcing Arthur Vance had been terminated as CEO, effective immediately. At 7, his father issued a public statement denouncing his son's shocking moral and financial irresponsibility and vowing to salvage the family's good name. At 8, his father arrived with the divorce papers. They are not contesting a single point, he stated, his tone flat and emotionless. You will receive 70% of all marital assets as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement, unconditional custody of the child, and Arthur is barred from any contact until a court-mandated psychiatric evaluation is finished. The Park Avenue apartment, the estate in the Hamptons, and absolute control of the charitable foundation are all yours. Clara skimmed the documents. It was everything she had fought for, every measure of justice she had sought. Arthur's access to the family trust has been frozen, citing the morality clause, his father continued. The trustees ratified it this morning. He is, for all intents and purposes, destitute, save for a handful of offshore accounts he thinks are hidden, and those accounts are now the focus of a federal probe. He's going to struggle to find a lawyer who won't demand a significant retainer. Clara affixed her signature to the document with a steady, deliberate hand. Her closest friend, Maria, poured them each a glass of mineral water. They did not propose a toast. This was not an occasion for celebration, but a quiet recognition that one chapter had closed, creating the space for another to begin. The full exposé was released online at 9 p.m. The entire scheme, the fraudulent shell corporations, the charity skimming, the psychological gaslighting, was exposed in excruciating, damning detail. By midnight, Arthur Vance's reputation was radioactive. Clara stood at the panoramic window, the New York City skyline glittering before her like a universe of shattered stars. She had actually succeeded. She had taken on a financial Goliath and his influential family, a dynasty that had been concealing its secrets for generations. She rested both hands on her pregnant stomach, and her son gave a powerful kick in response. "It is over now," she whispered. "He can no longer harm us." But, even as she said it, she recognized it wasn't entirely true. The legal battle would be a long, exhausting ordeal, probably dragging on for months, maybe years. There would be invasive questioning, non-stop media scrutiny, and a vicious custody battle. Arthur would not go down without a fight. His father, a retired Wall Street legend, would finance any legal maneuver required to protect the family's reputation. The Vance empire, though damaged, would conduct its methodical war of attrition. But she held a weapon they could not defeat: the simple, irrefutable truth. She had friends who would stand by her no matter what. She had a son who would be raised knowing his mother was a fighter, not a casualty. And that was more than enough. That was everything. A week later, Clara was in her doctor's office for a standard appointment. Her son was growing perfectly, his heartbeat regular and strong. "You have been under an immense amount of stress," the doctor noted softly. "How are you feeling, honestly?" "Better than I have any reason to be," Clara confessed, then hesitated. "Is that unusual? Shouldn't I be more devastated?" "There is no correct way to process betrayal," her doctor replied, making a note in her chart. "But to be honest, you appear more tranquil than I have seen you in over a year." It was the truth. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had served as the soundtrack to her pregnancy was finally silent. The restless nights, the perpetual worry, the deep-seated feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, it had all dissipated. "I just thought it was the pregnancy hormones," Clara said, "the anxiety, the paranoia. Arthur always said I was just being hormonal and overly emotional. You were having a completely logical response to a deeply unhealthy situation. Your body knew something was amiss, long before your mind was ready to accept it." Clara thought of all those nights she lay awake, attributing her sleeplessness to the baby kicking, or the mornings she felt a pit of dread when Arthur would get home, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. Her body had been screaming warnings, and she had methodically tuned them out. Not again. From this day forward, she would always listen to her gut. That afternoon, she arranged to have coffee with Isabel. Everyone had advised her not to. Maria, Arthur's father, even her own mother, who felt a tangled mix of emotions about her son-in-law's affair. But Clara had to look at the woman who had been a co-conspirator in her husband's great deception. They chose a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe in Greenwich Village, a neutral space away from the notice of the press. Isabel looked far older than her 27 years, her face etched with exhaustion and pain. Her hand shook as she reached for her latte. "I had no idea," she said, the words rushing out before Clara could say a word, "about the hedge fund, the SEC probe, about what he was doing with your charity's portfolio. I honestly thought—" She paused, collecting herself. "I honestly thought I was his real life. I believed you were just the business deal. Is that the story he told you?" He spun a tale I was desperate to hear. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "He said your marriage was just a strategic partnership to placate his board of directors. He promised that once the baby arrived, he would ask for a divorce so we could finally be a real family. And your son, Daniel?" The tears now streamed down her face. "He barely even knows he exists. He wires money from an overseas account and has presents delivered by messenger. But he never comes to see him. He was never truly there." Clara studied the woman across from her. She wasn't a villain or a homewrecker. She was just another casualty in the wreckage of Arthur's lies. Another person who had mistaken his elaborate act for actual love. "I'm not giving you absolution, Chloe," Olivia said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I can't. You knew he had a wife. You made your bed." Chloe nodded, a picture of weary surrender. "I know, but I also know you were his casualty too. In a different way, maybe, but still a casualty." A flicker of something crossed Chloe's face. The relief of confession, perhaps, or the sheer weight of a truth she'd carried for too long. "What will you do now?" Olivia asked. "My folks are in Ohio. I'm taking Leo and going back there. A clean slate." Chloe dabbed at her eyes. "I don't want a cent from him. Not his money, not his name. I just want out. Then you should have it." There were no hugs, no promises to call. Some chasms were just too deep for polite gestures. But as Olivia's car moved through the evening traffic along the Charles River, an unexpected sense of buoyancy filled her. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a release. A deliberate choice to stop dedicating anger to a man who had never been worthy of the space he occupied in her soul. The Beacon Hill townhouse was waiting. Olivia had brought in her own design team, not the one Liam's mother had decreed. She was selecting her own art, her own furniture, her own narrative. "Are you absolutely sure you've got this?" Sophie asked, sliding the last of the boxes into the back of the SUV. "Not in the slightest, but I have to," Olivia said, tearing off a strip of packing tape. "The baby's due in 4 weeks. I need to be in my own home." "That place was never a home, honey." "I know, but it's about to become one. I'm filling it with my books, my peace, my life. I'm taking it back." Sophie pulled her into a fierce, lingering embrace, the kind that acknowledges the brutal mechanics of a crisis without needing words. "You call me. For anything." "I will. I'm serious. 3 in the morning, you need to scream at someone who isn't a newborn, you call. I know, Sophie. I love you. I love you more, always." The drive from the Cambridge 2-bedroom back into Boston felt impossibly short. Olivia watched the leafy, quiet streets give way to the grand, historic skyline. It was the same route she'd driven in a daze, just weeks before, but today, everything was different. She had arrived at her friend's door in stunned silence. She was leaving now in a silence of her own making, one born not of shock, but of absolute resolve. 3 months later, a different woman stood at the threshold of that Beacon Hill townhouse. In her arms, she held a son named Samuel Hayes, a name that bore no connection to the Davenport dynasty. The townhouse was unrecognizable. The cold, minimalist decor and harsh chrome fixtures were gone, replaced by the warmth of reclaimed New England wood and soft, deep-hued fabrics. The aggressive, oversized modern art had been supplanted by compelling works from emerging female painters, and everywhere there were photographs, real moments of joy, not the staged portraits for society pages. Olivia carried Samuel to the large bay windows overlooking the public garden. The view was the same, a timeless tableau of city life, but her relationship to it had fundamentally shifted. She saw now that the elegant prison had never been locked. She'd always possessed the key. She just had to find the courage to use it. Samuel began to fuss, his internal clock signaling feeding time. Olivia settled into an antique rocking chair her grandfather had made, the same one her mother had rocked her in. 3 generations of women, connected by an unspoken fortitude. As she fed her son, she thought of the person she'd been, the one who would attend a lavish real estate gala, 8 months pregnant, feeling like a mere accessory. The one who, a week later, called a boutique hotel in Nantucket to confirm a surprise anniversary trip, only to have the concierge casually mention that Mr. Davenport's other reservation for the following weekend, with a misread was also confirmed. That woman had been shattered, adrift, clinging to the wreckage of her marriage. This woman was none of those things. The doorbell rang. It was David, her lawyer, for their weekly meeting. He brought files detailing the progress of her new foundation, now named the Hayes Trust. No more Davenport. No more tainted real estate money. Its first grants had gone out last week. Funding for historical building preservation and scholarships for young female artists. Liam's arraignment is set for next month, David said, his voice gentle, as always. The DA's office will be calling you to testify. I know. Are you ready for that? Olivia gazed down at Samuel's perfect, sleeping face. This was the boy who would one day need to know the whole story. Yes. She adjusted the infant in her arms. One day, he's going to ask about his father. And I need to be able to look him in the eye and tell him that I told the truth, that I refused to be silenced, that I stood for what was right and held him accountable. It won't be easy. His lawyers will paint you as scorned, unstable, everything they threatened before. Let them. I have the bank records. I have the city officials who will testify. I've got nothing left to fear. David gave a slight, proud smile. You're a different woman, Olivia. I just remembered who I was before I met him, she replied, her eyes meeting his. That woman was always there. She just got lost for a while. After David left, Olivia placed Samuel gently in his crib. She stood by the window, watching as dusk settled over the city, wrapping the world in a soft, forgiving light. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a reporter at the Globe. You'll want to read tomorrow's paper. We just won a Pulitzer. The expose, the series of articles that had unraveled the Davenport development empire, had just received journalism's highest honor. A second text came from a contact on the Davenport board. It's done. The board voted to dissolve the corporation. Liam's father is now facing his own federal investigation. The Boston dynasty is over. The father's legacy is in ruins. The son is facing trial. Everything Liam had ever prioritized, over his wife, over his unborn child, over basic human decency, had been reduced to dust. A final message arrived from an unsaved number. Olivia nearly ignored it, but her curiosity got the better of her. It was from Chloe. Thank you for not pulling me into the mess. I'm in counseling. My son Leo and I are okay. You gave us a chance at that. Olivia put her phone down. She went back to the nursery and watched the gentle rhythm of Samuel's breathing. She thought of that awful hotel phone call, the moment her life imploded, and knew it hadn't been an ending, it had been the beginning. About the casual confirmation of a hotel reservation that blew her life apart, about the polite, cheerful voice on the phone that delivered a fatal blow. She had gone to that real estate gala as Liam Davenport's pregnant wife. A polished ornament meant to reflect his success, she walked away, as herself, as Olivia, as a woman who refused to be demolished. The baby stirred, his small eyelids fluttering open and locking onto his mother's face with a soft, curious gaze. I'm going to tell you a story someday, Olivia whispered, about a woman who forgot her own foundation, who let a man convince her she was just a decorative facade on the building he was constructing, who almost let her own blueprints be completely redrawn. Samuel made a quiet noise, his tiny fists unclenching, and I will tell you how she rediscovered her own framework, how she learned new skills and built a beautiful life from the rubble of her old one. She reached into the bassinet, stroking her son's cheek. That woman was me, your mother, and I need you to know that you are never too broken to be repaired. You are never too lost to find your way home to yourself. You are never too silenced to find your own voice. Samuel wrapped his small hand around her finger, holding on with a strength that felt like an anchor. We're going to be okay, Olivia said. We are going to be so much more than okay. We are going to be the architects of our own lives, the lights of the city began to sparkle against the deepening night, a new evening, a fresh start. Olivia lifted her son, holding him close, and felt a deep, profound calm wash over her. She had arrived at her friend's house as one person and left as someone else entirely, and in the time between, she had reclaimed the one thing she thought was gone forever: herself. The end of that chapter was the true beginning of her story, and she couldn't wait to write the next page. The courthouse was a spectacle, a swarm of journalists packing the galleries, while camera crews flooded the front steps for what the local news called the trial of Boston's fallen dynasty. Marcus Thorne slumped at the polished mahogany table of the conference room, looking as if the weight of his own skyscrapers was crushing him. The bespoke suit that once projected power now seemed to swallow his diminished frame. His signature, shark-like grin had vanished, leaving only the grim set of his jaw. Sophia took her seat opposite him, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Her son, Leo, was safe at her mother's, who'd flown in from Miami to watch over him. Her attorney methodically laid out the timeline of deceit, the hidden penthouse, the credit card statements for gifts she never received, the entire meticulously crafted second life. It was all the proof she'd gathered in the weeks after finding that single, misplaced earring. Marcus's legal team did their best to discredit her, framing her as a vindictive spouse, trying to seize control of his real estate empire. Guided by a cold, hard clarity, she answered every question with surgical precision, offering no drama, no tears, just bank records and security keycard logs. When the deposition was paused, she walked past the man she was divorcing. Marcus looked up, his face a pallid mask of fury. Was it worth it, he spat, to burn everything to the ground? She paused, her gaze locking with the man she once adored, the man who had shattered her trust, the man who had unknowingly forged her into something unbreakable. Your entire life was a lie held up by fraudulent scaffolding, Marcus. I just kicked out the supports. She turned and walked out of the law office and into the biting Chicago wind, into a future she would now build herself. The judge's decision took less than an hour, a summary judgment in her favor on all counts. He was ordered to pay a settlement of $40 million. Sophia felt no giddy rush of victory. There was no winning, only the deep, resonant feeling of a great wrong being righted. That night, she held her baby, Leo, in their modest rental overlooking Millennium Park, the city lights a glittering tapestry below. The mobile of tiny silver kitchen whisks she'd hung over his crib turned gently in the draft. She considered the future that had been demolished, and the one she was now free to create from her own recipe. The woman she had been, and the chef she was finally ready to become. The real estate titan's expectant wife had walked out of his awards gala in stony silence. By the following quarter, the Thorne Development's portfolio was in a catastrophic tailspin. But that was merely the appetizer, not the main course. The real story was about a woman who remembered her own 5-star value, who rediscovered her own fire, and who crafted a new life from the ruins of a betrayal. The real story was about resilience, about courage, and about the incredible power that comes from refusing to be a footnote on someone else's menu any longer. Sophia kissed her son's temple, watching the skyline sparkle. Once upon a time, she whispered, there was a chef who was led to believe she was just a supporting ingredient in someone else's grand feast. But she was never just an ingredient. She was the master chef finalizing her own creation. Leo hummed softly in his crib. Outside, the city thrummed with its relentless, vibrant pulse, and Sophia Rossi no longer. Thorne was finally, truly home. If this story moved you, if you felt Sophia's heartbreak and celebrated her triumph, you're in good company. Hundreds of our followers have found strength in narratives, just like this. One drop, a comment, and tell us what would you do if you found a reservation for a romantic getaway for two that wasn't with you. I personally read each and every comment, and your story might spark our next one. If you are new to our community, we hope you'll consider subscribing and ringing that bell for all notifications. We serve up moving news stories every single week. Tales of strength, grit, and the quiet power of women who demand to be heard. Please share this with anyone you feel might need to see it, because sometimes a story is the exact recipe a person needs to begin cooking up their own destiny. And if this story in particular nourished your spirit, please give it a like. It helps our channel grow and allows more people to find these stories when they are hungering for them the most. A final thought: this content has been thoughtfully prepared. He had constructed a life on false foundations and empty promises, building a facade intended not to shelter, but to conceal, to control, and to serve his own ego. Sophia stared at the stack of evidence, at the story it told so clearly. He hadn't just been unfaithful in a marriage, he had built an entire world of deceit. And she was about to issue the demolition permit model